My name is Joseph of Arimathea. I'm here to tell you the hidden truth about Jesus' burial.
A tomb for the king, the wealthy rebel who buried Jesus. I was there when the sun died at noon. I stood in the corridors of power while the sky turned the color of a bruised soul. They call me Joseph of Arimathea, a man of wealth, a man of the council, a noble of Jerusalem. But on that day, I was nothing but a coward wrapped in fine linen. I spent my life building a name and a tomb, thinking I could buy my peace. But you cannot buy the truth. I watched them nail the king to a tree while I sat in silence, hiding behind my status. But when the earth shook and the temple veil tore, I knew my silence had to end. The day the world went down into darkness, my heart finally saw the light. In the Sanhedrin, we sat in terror as the shadows grew long in the middle of the day. I remember the faces of my colleagues, Caiaphas, Annas, their gold jewelry glinting in the flickering torchlight as they tried to justify a murder. I spent many nights in secret meetings with Nicodemus. We were the wealthy rebels. We met Jesus in the shadows because we were too afraid to follow him in the light. I told him, "What good is our gold if it cannot buy back the life of the innocent?" But as the darkness stayed over Jerusalem for 3 long hours, the fear of man left me, and the fear of God took its place. I realized that day, what good is a seat at the table if the king is on a cross? I walked to the praetorium with my head held high for the first time. Every step felt like a mile. To claim a crucified body was to claim his crime as your own. I stood before Pontius Pilate, a man whose hands were washed but whose heart was black. "I want the body," I told him. He laughed at me. He couldn't understand why a man of my standing would want the remains of a condemned man. But I stood my ground. For the first time in my life, my wealth wasn't for me, it was for him. I used my status to buy his dignity. Then came the hill, Golgotha. The smell was unbearable, sweat, iron, and the heavy metallic scent of Roman death. Nicodemus was already there, waiting in the gloom with his jars of spices. We climbed that timber together. I remember looking at him, his hands trembling as much as mine. "We are late, Joseph," he whispered to me, his voice breaking. "We are years too late." I reached up to pull the first iron nail from the wood, and replied, "Better to stand with him in his death than to have never stood at all. We shall serve him in the silence of his sleep." The iron groaned against the wood, a sound I will never forget. We washed the gore from his brow with water that felt too holy to touch. As we wrapped him in the finest linen my gold could buy, Nicodemus began to pour the myrrh. 100 pounds, he muttered, his tears falling into the spices. "It is the burial of a Caesar." I looked at him and said, "No, Nicodemus, Caesar only rules the living. We are burying the one who rules the grave." We carried him to my tomb, the tomb I had carved for my own vanity. I laid him on my stone, thinking I was giving him a gift. I didn't know. He was just borrowing it. Then came the third morning. My servant woke me, screaming, his face pale as ash. I ran to the garden, my heart hammering against my ribs. The stone, my massive, expensive stone, was cast aside like a discarded toy. I stepped inside, covering my face in pure shock, and that is when I saw it. The linen was there. The spices were there. But the king was gone. The aftermath was a storm of fire. Before the sun had fully risen, the temple guards were at my door. They dragged me before the high priest, Caiaphas. The room was cold, the air thick with the smell of incense and rage. Caiaphas stepped down from his throne, his eyes burning into mine. "Where is he, Joseph?" he hissed. "You bought the tomb. You sealed the stone. Now the stone is moved and the body is gone. Tell us where you have hidden the deceiver." I looked at him, the man I had feared for 20 years, and I felt nothing but pity. "I did not steal him, Caiaphas. I only gave him a place to rest. He is the one who took his life back." They threw me into a windowless cell, intending to starve the truth out of me. They locked the doors and set a seal, hoping the wealthy rebel would die in the dark. But in the middle of the night, a light filled that stone room that was brighter than the sun. It was the same light I saw in the garden. The chains fell away like dead leaves. The heavy doors opened without a sound. I walked out of Jerusalem a hunted man, but a free soul. I realized then that when you serve the King of Life, no prison on earth can hold you. I left behind the markets of Israel and the gold of the temple. I took a ship and sailed toward the setting sun, toward the misty, distant shores of the west, to the islands they call Britain. I carried nothing but a staff and the silver cup from the Last Supper, the vessel that held the promise of the new covenant. Throughout the long voyage, the storms raged and the waves rose like mountains, but I was never afraid. I had seen the empty grave. What was a little wind to a man who had seen death defeated? I arrived at a place called Glastonbury, weary and worn. I carried nothing but a staff and a story. People asked me why a man of my wealth would wander the world as a nomad. I told them that once you have held the Creator of the stars in your arms, no palace on earth feels like home. I climbed a hill in the winter cold and planted my staff in the soil. As I prayed, I watched the dry wood bloom with white flowers in the middle of the frost, a sign that life can spring even from the coldest ground, a sign that the King was with me even at the edge of the world. For years, I built a small chapel of wattle and reed, the first of its kind. I watched the wild people of those islands come to hear the tale of the carpenter who broke the gates of Hades. My wealth was gone, my name was forgotten in the halls of Jerusalem, but I was the richest man in the world. I had seen the truth. I had touched the wounds. I had been the rebel who stood when everyone else fled. I tell you this now, as my own time draws near to enter the earth. Do not fear the darkness of your day. Do not fear the power of the council or the weight of the stone. The one I buried is the one who carries the world. My tomb is still empty, and because it is empty, my heart is full. I was the wealthy rebel who gave a king a grave, only to find that the king had given me a kingdom. I am Joseph, and I have traveled 10,000 miles to tell you this. The darkness is only a shadow, and the stone has already been moved. After the miraculous events in Jerusalem and his divine release from the high priest's prison, Joseph did not remain in Judea. Tradition tells us that he was cast adrift at sea with several companions, including Lazarus and Mary Magdalene. Guided by faith rather than oars, their vessel eventually reached the shores of Marseille, France. From there, Joseph felt a calling to go even further, to the edge of the known world, Britain. He arrived at a place called Glastonbury, the Holy Thorn, and the first church. Exhausted from his travels, Joseph climbed a hill, now known as Weary All Hill. He struck his staff into the ground to rest, and in that moment, a miracle occurred. The staff took root and blossomed into a hawthorn tree that would bloom every Christmas for centuries to come. With the permission of the local king Arviragus, Joseph built a humble chapel, the small chapel of wattle and reed you mentioned earlier. This was the first Christian church in Britain, the keeper of the Grail. In his final years, Joseph lived as a hermit and a teacher. He was the keeper of the most sacred relic of the faith, the cup used at the Last Supper. He taught the local people about the light of the world and the resurrection he had personally witnessed. He died peacefully in Glastonbury, having transformed from a wealthy member of the Sanhedrin into a humble missionary. His legacy lived on through the legends of the Holy Grail and the spiritual foundation of a new nation. If this story blesses you, kindly subscribe, like, and share.